standing in the December snow outside my son's house, clutching a folder containing the greatest gift I'd ever planned to give, the deed to distribute my entire 29 million fortune to my children and grandchildren. I heard words through the lit window that would shatter everything I believed about family love. Just turn off the lights and pretend we're not home. I can't deal with Mom tonight. In that moment, at 72 years old, I learned that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most can break your heart in ways you never imagined possible. Before I begin my story, let me know in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is. I just want to know I'm not alone in this. And if you feel moved by what you hear, consider subscribing. It helps more people become aware of the reality of elder abuse. Now let me tell you what really happened. Second, my name is Margaret Thompson, but everyone has always called me Maggie. I'm 72 years old, and until 6 months ago, I thought I knew exactly what my family meant to me and what I meant to them. I had spent 3 weeks planning the perfect Christmas Eve surprise. Not just any surprise, mind you, but the kind that would change my children's lives forever. The kind that would finally show them just how much their old mother loved them, despite all the years of growing distance, despite all the phone calls that went unreturned, despite all the holidays I spent alone while they were too busy to visit. You see, I had decided to give them everything. Every last penny of the fortune I'd built over 40 years in business, starting from nothing after my dear husband Harold passed away. $29 million. The entire inheritance I'd planned to leave them when I died. I wanted to give it to them while I was still alive, to see their faces light up with joy and gratitude. The plan was simple. I would arrive at Robert's house on Christmas Eve, just as the family was gathering for dinner. My son Robert, my daughter Linda, and all 4 of my precious grandchildren would be there. I'd purchased gifts for everyone, of course, but the real surprise was in the manila folder I carried carefully in my purse, legal documents that would transfer the bulk of my wealth to them immediately. I had already spoken to my financial advisor, Emma Chen, about the logistics. Emma had been managing my investments for nearly 10 years, ever since Harold passed. She was more than just my advisor. She had become something like a daughter to me, always checking in, always making sure I was taking care of myself. When I told her about my Christmas Eve plan, she had looked concerned. "Or Mrs. Thompson," she had said in that gentle way of hers, "are you sure about this timing? Maybe we should have a family meeting first. Discuss everyone's financial needs and goals." But I had waved away her concerns. "Emma dear, I know my children. This will bring us closer together. Money has never been what's important to them. They'll be so touched that I trust them with this responsibility." Looking back now, I realize Emma's worried expression should have told me something. She knew my children better than I wanted to admit. She had fielded their occasional phone calls over the years, always asking about my finances, never asking about my health or happiness. The morning of Christmas Eve dawned crisp and clear. I dressed in my best red wool coat, the one Harold had bought me for our last Christmas together 15 years ago. I wanted to look nice for my family. I wanted them to be proud of me. I had tried calling Robert that morning to make sure everyone would be there, but it went straight to voicemail. Same with Linda. This wasn't unusual. They were probably busy with Christmas preparations. I decided the surprise would be even better if I just showed up unannounced. The drive to Robert's house took 45 minutes through the winding suburban streets of Millbrook Heights, the affluent neighborhood where both my children now lived. Robert's house was a sprawling colonial with a circular driveway, paid for in part by the generous loans I'd given him over the years to help with his struggling investment firm. Linda lived just 3 streets away in an equally impressive Tudor-style home, also subsidized by my quiet financial support. As I pulled up to Robert's house at 6:30 that evening, I felt my heart flutter with excitement. The house was ablaze with warm light, and I could see the silhouettes of people moving around inside. Christmas music drifted faintly through the walls. This was going to be perfect. I parked on the street rather than in the driveway. I wanted to maintain the element of surprise. With my purse clutched tightly in one hand and a shopping bag full of wrapped gifts in the other, I made my way up the brick walkway. But as I approached the front door, something made me pause. Through the large picture window that faced the front yard, I could see into the living room clearly. My family was indeed there. Robert, his wife Carol, Linda, her husband James, and all 4 grandchildren. They were laughing, passing around plates of food, completely absorbed in their Christmas Eve celebration. It looked so warm and inviting, so much like the family gatherings we used to have when Harold was alive and the children were small. My heart swelled with love and anticipation. I was about to give them the greatest gift imaginable, and I would finally be truly included in their joy. I raised my hand to knock on the door. And that's when I heard Linda's voice, crystal clear through the window. "Thank God Mom didn't show up tonight. I was so worried she'd try to insert herself into our Christmas, like she always does." I froze, my knuckles still poised inches from the wooden door. Robert's laugh carried easily through the glass. "I know, right? I saw she called this morning, but I figured if we didn't answer, she'd get the hint. We deserve one Christmas without having to manage the Maggie situation." The Maggie situation. That's what my son called me, a situation to be managed. "She's been so needy lately." Carol, Robert's wife, chimed in. "Always calling, always wanting to visit. Doesn't she understand we have our own lives?" My legs suddenly felt unsteady. The shopping bag of gifts slipped from my numb fingers and landed softly in the snow at my feet. "Mom's just lonely," Linda said, but her tone held no sympathy. "But that's not our problem to solve. She chose to stay in that tiny apartment instead of moving to a nice retirement community. She could make friends her own age instead of depending on us for entertainment. Besides," Robert added, and I could see him gesturing dismissively even through the window, "it's not like she doesn't have the money to keep herself busy. Dad left her pretty well set up, plus whatever she's got from selling the business. She could travel, take cruises, whatever old people do." "Exactly." James, Linda's husband, joined the conversation. "Our kids are at crucial ages. Emma starts college next year, and Michael's got high school applications. We can't be dropping everything every time your mom feels like having a family moment." One of my grandchildren, I think it was Emma, named after my financial advisor, looked up from her phone. "Why doesn't Grandma just move to Florida like other old people? Then she wouldn't be around to bother us all the time." The adults laughed. They actually laughed at that cruel joke from my own granddaughter. "Don't be mean, honey," Linda said, but she was still smiling. "Grandma means well. She just doesn't understand that we're not her entertainment committee." I stood there in the snow for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, listening to my children, my babies, whom I had raised and loved and sacrificed for, discussing me like I was some kind of pest they needed to avoid. The manila folder in my purse suddenly felt impossibly heavy. Inside it were documents that would have made Robert's financial struggles disappear overnight. Legal papers that would have secured college educations for all 4 grandchildren. Investment plans that would have set Linda up for the comfortable retirement she was always worried about. $29 million worth of love, and they couldn't even bear to have me in the same room. "Next year, let's just go to Cancun for Christmas," Robert was saying. "Get a big family villa, just the 8 of us. No complications, no obligations." "That sounds perfect," Linda agreed. "Though we should probably send Mom a nice card or something so she doesn't feel completely forgotten." A card. After 47 years of motherhood, after building a business from nothing to provide for their futures, after every sleepless night spent worrying about their happiness, I was worth a card. The snow was falling harder now, and I realized I was shivering, not from the cold, but from a deep chill that seemed to start in my chest and spread outward until even my fingers felt numb. I bent down slowly and picked up the shopping bag of gifts. Then I turned around and walked back to my car, my footsteps the only sound in the quiet suburban evening. As I drove away from that warm, bright house full of laughter that had no room for me, I made a decision that would change everything. If my children saw me as nothing more than the Maggie situation, then perhaps it was time for Maggie to stop being anyone's problem to solve. The manila folder containing their Christmas surprise sat unopened on my passenger seat as I drove through the snowy night toward home, toward Emma Chen's phone number, and toward a very different kind of Christmas gift than anyone could have imagined. I drove home through the empty Christmas Eve streets in a daze, the windshield wipers fighting against the falling snow that seemed determined to blur everything beyond recognition. How fitting, I thought. Even the weather was conspiring to make this night as gray and unclear as my suddenly uncertain future. My small apartment on Maple Street felt different when I walked through the door. The same furniture, the same photographs on the mantel, the same Christmas tree I decorated alone 3 weeks ago while humming carols and dreaming of family togetherness. But somehow, everything looked smaller now, sadder, like a stage set for a play about a lonely old woman who didn't know her part was over. I set the bag of unopened gifts by the door and hung up my red wool coat with shaking hands. The manila folder felt like it weighed 50 pounds as I carried it to the kitchen table and set it down next to the plate of Christmas cookies I'd baked for an audience that would never come. For a long time, I just sat there staring at that folder. Inside were documents that represented not just money, but 40 years of my life's work. Every late night I'd spent building my business after Harold died. Every sacrifice I'd made to ensure my children would never want for anything. Every careful investment decision Emma and I had made to grow that modest inheritance into something substantial. $29 million. To Robert and Linda, it was just numbers on a page, something they assumed would come to them eventually anyway. But to me, it represented love in its most practical form. Security. The promise that my children would never struggle the way Harold and I had in our early years. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes, but I couldn't buy the one thing I wanted most: my children's genuine affection. At 10:30 that night I did something I had never done before. I called Emma at home on Christmas Eve. "Mrs. Thompson?" Emma's voice was instantly alert despite the late hour. "Is everything all right? Are you hurt?" Even in my darkest moment, that simple concern in her voice, real worry for my well-being, not my bank account, nearly made me cry. "Emma dear, I'm so sorry to bother you on Christmas Eve. I know you're probably with your family. Mrs. Thompson, you're never a bother. What's wrong? You sound upset." I took a deep breath. The surprise didn't go as planned. There was a pause. "Oh, Maggie. What happened?" She called me Maggie. In 10 years of working together, Emma had always been scrupulously professional, calling me Mrs. Thompson even when I insisted she didn't need to be so formal. But now, hearing the pain in my voice, she dropped the formality like the unnecessary barrier it had always been. "They don't want me there, Emma. My own children, they see me as a burden. A problem to be managed." The words came out in a rush, along with the tears I'd been holding back since I left Robert's house. They were laughing about avoiding me, joking about sending me to Florida like other old people, so I wouldn't bother them anymore. "Oh, honey." Emma's voice was soft with sympathy. "I'm so sorry. Did you go through with the transfer?" "No." I looked at the manila folder through my tears. "No, I couldn't. I just left." "Emma, I need to ask you something. And I need you to be completely honest with me." "Of course." "When my children call your office, what do they ask about?" Another pause, longer this time. I could practically hear Emma choosing her words carefully. "Mrs. Thompson, please, I need to know." Emma sighed. "They ask about your assets, your portfolio performance. Whether you've made any large withdrawals or donations. They've never asked about your health or whether you're happy." The truth hit me like a physical blow, even though I'd already suspected it. "How often do they call?" "Robert calls about once a month. Linda maybe every 6 weeks. Usually right after the quarterly reports go out." Quarterly reports. They tracked my money with the diligence of accountants, but couldn't remember to call on my birthday. "Emma, I want to change my will." "Mrs. Thompson, you don't have to make any big decisions tonight. You're upset, and rightfully so, but maybe we should wait until after the holidays." "Wow." "No." My voice was steadier now, strengthened by a resolve I didn't know I possessed. "I've been making decisions based on what I hope my children felt for me, not what they actually feel. It's time I faced the truth." "What are you thinking?" I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the snow-covered street. A few houses still had their Christmas lights twinkling, but most of the neighborhood was dark and quiet. Tomorrow, Christmas morning, other families would be opening presents together, sharing breakfast, making memories. I would be here alone, as I had been for the past 5 Christmases since I'd stopped trying to force my way into celebrations where I wasn't wanted. "I want to set up a foundation," I said. "Something that will help other elderly people who are being neglected or mistreated by their families. Elder abuse prevention? Maybe programs to help seniors find genuine community and purpose." Emma was quiet for a moment. That's actually a beautiful idea, Maggie. Your husband would be proud, Harold." My sweet Harold, who had loved me fiercely and completely until the day he died. He would have been appalled at how our children treated me. He also would have told me to stop enabling their disrespect years ago. "I want to call it the Harold Thompson Foundation," I said. "And I want it to be funded with the bulk of my estate. Not all of it," I added quickly. "I'll leave something for the children and grandchildren. Enough to show that I still love them." but not enough to reward their cruelty. How much are you thinking? I did some quick math in my head. 100,000 each for Robert and Linda. 50,000 each for the grandchildren, to be held in trust until they turn 25. That's very generous, given the circumstances, Emma said gently. It's more than fair. And Emma, I want the rest to go to the foundation immediately, while I'm still alive. I want to be involved in choosing how it's used. I want to see the good it can do. We can absolutely do that. There are tax implications to consider, and we'll need to work with an estate attorney, but it's completely doable. For the first time in hours, I felt something that wasn't pain or disappointment. It was purpose. There's something else, I said. I don't want my children to know about any of this until after it's done. Can we keep the foundation quiet until it's fully established? Of course. Though Maggie, you should know that once you start transferring assets of this magnitude, they'll find out eventually. Especially if they're monitoring your accounts as closely as it seems. Good. Let them wonder. Let them worry for once about what I might be doing with my money, instead of just assuming it will all be theirs someday. Emma chuckled, and I could hear approval in her voice. You know what? I think this new side of you is going to be very good for both the foundation and for you personally. What do you mean? I mean that in 10 years of working together, I've watched you give and give and give, always putting everyone else's needs before your own. It's time you put yourself first for once. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen until well past midnight, making lists and plans. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about what my children wanted from me or how I could earn their love. I was thinking about what I wanted to do with the years I had left. The foundation was just the beginning. If my children saw me as nothing more than an inconvenient old woman, then perhaps it was time to show them what this inconvenient old woman was truly capable of. I looked at the unopened gifts still sitting by the door. Tomorrow, I would return them all. No more begging for affection with expensive presents. No more trying to buy my way into family gatherings. The manila folder full of inheritance documents went straight into the fireplace. I watched the papers curl and burn, feeling lighter with each flame that danced up the chimney. Somewhere across town, my children were probably tucking their children into bed, satisfied with their lovely family Christmas Eve that had been unspoiled by the Maggie situation. They had no idea that the Maggie situation was about to become something entirely different than they'd ever imagined. Christmas morning arrived gray and quiet, much like my mood. For the first time in decades, I didn't wake up wondering if my children would call to wish me a Merry Christmas. I already knew they wouldn't. The freedom in that certainty was both liberating and heartbreaking. Instead of moping around my apartment, as I had done for the past 5 Christmases, I got dressed and drove to Emma's office. Yes, she had given me her home number and told me to call any time, but this was business now. Important business that deserved a professional setting. Emma met me there despite the holiday, bringing coffee and pastries from the bakery down the street. She had always been considerate that way, but now I noticed it differently. This wasn't just professional courtesy, this was genuine care from someone who saw me as a person worth caring about. I've been thinking about our conversation all night, she said, settling into the chair across from my desk. I have some ideas about how to structure the foundation for maximum impact. I pulled out the notepad I'd filled with thoughts during my sleepless night. So do I. But first, Emma, I need to ask you something personal. Why do you care so much about this project? About me? Emma looked surprised by the question. She set down her coffee cup and considered her words carefully. My grandmother lived with us when I was growing up, she said finally. After my grandfather died, my parents moved her into our house. But they treated her like a burden, just like your children treat you. They gave her a room and food, but no respect, no inclusion in family decisions. She became invisible in her own son's house. What happened to her? She died lonely and sad at 86, convinced she was worthless because that's how they made her feel every day. I was just a teenager then, and I didn't understand how to help her. I've regretted that for 20 years. Emma's eyes were bright with unshed tears. When I started working with you, I saw so much of my grandmother in your situation. The way you light up when your children call, even though they only want something. The way you make excuses for their behavior. The way you keep giving and giving, hoping it will make them love you the way you deserve to be loved. Now I understood. This foundation isn't just about helping other elderly people. It's about helping your grandmother, even though it's too late. Maybe. But more than that, it's about helping you realize your own worth before it's too late. We spent the next 4 hours creating the blueprint for the Harold Thompson Foundation. Emma had done her research overnight, contacting colleagues who specialized in nonprofit law, elder care advocacy, and foundation management. We can establish 3 main programs, she explained, showing me her notes. First, a hotline and counseling service for elderly people experiencing family neglect or abuse. Second, funding for community centers and programs that bring isolated seniors together. And third, education programs to help families understand the emotional and psychological needs of their aging parents. The third one is interesting, I said. Though I suspect some families won't want to hear that message. Maybe not. But some will, and the ones who don't, Emma shrugged. Well, at least their parents will know they have other options. We decided to start with an initial transfer of $20 million to establish the foundation. The remaining $9 million would stay in my personal accounts for living expenses, and the modest inheritances I still plan to leave my children. There's something else we need to discuss, Emma said as we were wrapping up. Your living situation? What about it, Maggie? You're about to become the founder and primary benefactor of a major charitable foundation. You'll be giving interviews, meeting with other nonprofit leaders, possibly speaking at conferences. That little apartment doesn't really fit with the image of someone who's changing lives with this kind of money. I hadn't thought about that. For years, I'd lived small and quiet, trying not to be a bother to anyone. The apartment was adequate for a woman who spent most of her time alone. But Emma was right. If I was going to step into this new role, I needed to step up in other ways too. What are you suggesting? There's a beautiful senior living community called Willowbrook Gardens about 20 minutes from here. It's not a nursing home, it's more like an active adult community. Independent living with optional services, lots of social activities, even a community garden and art studio. I think you'd love it there. You've been researching this too. Emma blushed slightly. I may have driven by there this morning, just to see what it was like. I had to laugh. Emma-chan, I think you care more about my well-being than my own children do. That's not hard to do, she said quietly. 3 days later, Emma and I toured Willowbrook Gardens together. It was nothing like the depressing nursing homes my children had probably imagined when they joked about sending me away. The apartments were spacious and elegant, with full kitchens and private balconies. The common areas were beautifully decorated and filled with residents who looked genuinely happy to be there. Our tour guide was a woman named Dorothy Patterson, 78 years old, and clearly the social director of the place, whether that was her official title or not. Oh, honey, you'll love it here, Dorothy said, linking her arm through mine as we walked through the art studio. We have book clubs and gardening groups and a wine-tasting society that meets every Friday. Last month we took a bus trip to see the Christmas lights in the city. Next month we're planning a cooking class with that chef from the Food Network. It sounds wonderful, I said, and I meant it. But isn't it expensive? Dorothy laughed. Well, it's not cheap, but most of us here worked hard our whole lives and saved our money. Why shouldn't we enjoy it now instead of sitting in dreary apartments waiting for our children to visit? The words hit home. Dorothy was right. I had been living like I was already dead, preserving my money and my energy for people who didn't want either one. How long have you lived here? I asked. 3 years. Best decision I ever made. My son used to call me once a month out of obligation. Now he calls because he actually wants to hear about my life. Funny how that works. I signed the lease that afternoon. Emma helped me pack over the next week, and I was amazed at how little I actually wanted to keep. The apartment had been filled with things, furniture, books, decorations, that I'd accumulated over the years but that held no real meaning. The only items I truly cared about were my photos of Harold, a few pieces of jewelry he'd given me, and the quilt my mother had made for our wedding. It feels like I'm shedding an old skin, I told Emma as we loaded the last box into the moving truck. Maybe you are, she said. Maybe that's exactly what you're doing. The first sign that my children had noticed something was different came on January 15th, 3 weeks after I'd moved to Willowbrook Gardens. I was in the middle of my morning yoga class. Yes, yoga, something I never would have tried in my old life, when my phone buzzed with a call from Robert. I let it go to voicemail. An hour later, Linda called. I was having coffee with Dorothy and 2 other residents, discussing the foundation's first newsletter. I let that call go to voicemail too. By evening, I had 6 missed calls from my children and 1 from Robert's wife Carol. The voicemails were all the same, concerned questions about why I wasn't answering my phone, demands to know if I was all right, and increasingly panicked speculation about what might have happened to me. I waited until after dinner to call Robert back. "Mom! Thank God. We've been trying to reach you all day. Are you okay? Are you hurt?" For a moment I almost fell back into the old pattern of apologizing for worrying them, of explaining myself like a child who'd stayed out past curfew. Then I remembered Christmas Eve. I remembered their laughter as they called me, the Maggie situation. "I'm fine, Robert. I was busy today, busy." "Mom, it's the middle of January. What could you possibly be busy with?" The dismissive tone in his voice, the assumption that my life couldn't possibly contain anything important enough to keep me from answering his call immediately, reminded me exactly why I was making these changes. "I've moved, Robert. Moved? What do you mean moved where?" "I'm living at Willowbrook Gardens now. It's a lovely community for active seniors." "I should have done it years ago." Silence on the other end of the line. "Then, you moved to a nursing home. Mom, why didn't you discuss this with us first?" "This is a major decision." "It's not a nursing home, it's independent living. And I'm 72 years old, Robert. I don't need permission to make decisions about my own life." But what about your apartment, your things, the financial implications?" Always back to money with Robert. "I've taken care of everything. Emma helped me with the transition." "Huh? Mom? Emma works for you. She's not family. You should have called us." "Should I have? When was the last time you called me just to see how I was doing? Not to ask about my investments or complain about your problems, but just to talk to your mother." Another silence. A longer one this time. "Mom, we talk." "We do, Robert. But we don't communicate. There's a difference. I don't understand what's gotten into you lately. You're acting so different?" "Different how?" "I don't know. Distant, independent. It's not like you, not like me." He was right about that. The old Maggie would never have moved without consulting her children first. She would never have ignored their phone calls or spoken to them, with anything less than desperate gratitude for their attention. But the old Maggie was gone, burned up in the fireplace, along with those inheritance documents on Christmas Eve. "Maybe you never knew me as well as you thought you did," I said. After I hung up, I sat on my new balcony looking out at the gardens below, where some of the residents were taking an evening walk despite the cold. Tomorrow, Emma and I were meeting with the architect who would design the foundation's first community center. Next week, I had lunch plans with Dorothy and her book club, and I was genuinely excited to discuss the novel they'd chosen. For the first time in years, I had a life that belonged entirely to me, and my children were finally noticing that I existed. Funny how that worked. February brought an unexpected phone call that changed everything. I was in the foundation's temporary office, a small suite Emma had helped me rent while we searched for permanent headquarters, when my assistant buzzed me. Yes, I had an assistant now. Margaret Riley, a retired teacher who had volunteered to help with administrative work and ended up becoming indispensable. "Mrs. Thompson, there's a Carol Thompson on the line for you. She says she's your daughter-in-law." I almost smiled. Carol, Robert's wife, had never called me directly in the 15 years she'd been married to my son. Every conversation had gone through Robert first, as if I were too fragile or too much of a burden for her to deal with personally. "Put her through, Margaret." "Maggie, it's Carol." Her voice was strained, almost nervous. "I hope you don't mind me calling directly. I got your number from the directory listing for your foundation." "Not at all, dear. What can I do for you?" "Well, this is awkward, but Robert and Linda asked me to call. They're worried about you." "Were they? How thoughtful." "Maggie, they found out about the Harold Thompson Foundation. Robert hired someone to look into your recent financial activity." There it was. I'd been wondering when they would get around to investigating what I was doing with my money. I was surprised it had taken them 6 weeks. And what did they find? $20 million, Maggie. You've donated $20 million to this foundation in the past month. They're concerned that someone might be taking advantage of you. Taking advantage of me how? Well, this Emma person, for instance. She's your financial advisor, and now she's helping you give away your life savings. Don't you think that's a conflict of interest? I leaned back in my chair and looked out the window of my office. Below, I could see the construction crew breaking ground for our first community center. The Harold Thompson Foundation was becoming real, brick by brick. "Carol, Let me ask you something. In the 15 years you've been married to my son, how many times have you called me just to see how I was doing? What? That's not what this is about? Isn't it? You're calling now because you're worried about my money. Not because you're worried about me. Just like Robert and Linda have always done. That's not fair. They love you? Do they? When was the last time either of them visited me? And I don't mean stopping by to ask for a loan or to drop off grandchildren for babysitting. I mean actually visiting, spending time with me because they enjoyed my company. Silence on the other end of the line. Carol, I appreciate your concern. But I'm 72 years old, I'm of sound mind, and I'm finally doing something meaningful with my life. If that worries Robert and Linda, perhaps they should examine why. But Maggie, $20 million. As my money to do with as I choose. Give Robert and Linda my love, dear, and tell them if they want to discuss this further, they can call me themselves. Or better yet, they can come visit. I'd love to show them around Willowbrook Gardens. After I hung up, Margaret poked her head into my office. Everything all right, Mrs. Thompson? Everything's fine, dear. In fact, I think things are about to get very interesting. I wasn't wrong. 3 days later, Emma called me with an urgent tone I'd never heard from her before. Maggie, we need to meet. Today. Can you come to my office? Of course. What's wrong? Just come. And Maggie, don't discuss anything about the foundation over the phone for the next few days. When I arrived at Emma's office, she looked genuinely worried. She closed the door behind me and gestured to a chair. Your son Robert came to see me yesterday. Did he? How lovely. Did he make an appointment, or did he just assume you'd drop everything to see him? Emma almost smiled at that. He made an appointment. He was very formal. Professional. He said he was representing the family's interests and wanted to discuss your recent financial decisions. And what did you tell him? Exactly what I'm ethically obligated to tell him. Nothing. Your finances are confidential, and you haven't authorized me to share any information with anyone. How did he take that? Not well. He started making accusations. Said I was manipulating you, taking advantage of your loneliness, possibly even suffering from early dementia. I felt a flash of anger so strong it surprised me. He said what? He threatened to have your mental competency evaluated. He said the family was concerned that you weren't capable of making sound financial decisions anymore. Can he do that? Emma shook her head. Not without significant legal justification. And frankly, Maggie, anyone who spent 5 minutes with you would see that you're sharper and more focused than most people half your age. But he can make things difficult and expensive if he wants to fight. I stood up and walked to Emma's window, looking out at the city where I'd built my business, raised my children, and spent the happiest years of my life with Harold. Somewhere out there, my son was plotting to have me declared mentally incompetent because I'd chosen to spend my own money on something other than his comfort. Emma, I want to accelerate our timeline. What do you mean? How quickly can we transfer the remaining assets to the foundation? All of it except for the amounts we designated for the children and grandchildren. Maggie, that's another $9 million. Are you sure you want to? I'm absolutely sure. If Robert wants to fight me over my mental competency, let him do it over $1 million instead of $9 million. Emma was quiet for a moment. It would take about 2 weeks to process everything legally. But Maggie, this means you'd be left with just your basic living expenses and the money for their inheritances. No cushion? No emergency fund beyond what's reasonable. That's fine. I don't need a cushion anymore. I have something better. I have purpose. And I have friends who actually care about me. What about Robert and Linda? They're going to be furious when they find out. I turned back to face Emma, feeling more determined than I had ever felt in my life. Let them be furious. For 47 years, I've been trying to earn their love by being the mother I thought they wanted. Accommodating, generous, grateful for any scrap of attention they threw my way. It never worked, Emma. They don't love me. They love what I can do for them. I know that. I've known it for years. But accepting it must be incredibly painful. It was. But you know what's more painful? Wasting the rest of my life trying to be someone I'm not for people who will never appreciate it anyway. Over the next 2 weeks, while the lawyers processed the asset transfers, I threw myself into foundation work with an energy I hadn't felt in years. We interviewed potential directors for our first community center, reviewed applications for grants to existing elder care programs, and began planning our first educational workshop for families struggling with aging parent relationships. The work was fulfilling in ways I hadn't expected. Every day brought letters from elderly people who had heard about our hotline, thanking us for letting them know they weren't alone. Social workers began referring clients to us, and other nonprofits reached out about collaboration opportunities. Most surprisingly, I found myself becoming something of a public figure. A local newspaper ran a feature story about the foundation, calling me a philanthropist with a mission. A radio station asked me to do an interview about elder care. The mayor's office invited me to speak at a conference about aging in our community. For the first time in my adult life, people wanted to hear what I had to say, not because I was someone's mother or someone's client, but because my ideas and experiences had value in their own right. The contrast with my children's treatment was stark and painful, but also clarifying. On a Thursday evening in late February, as I was leaving the foundation office, after a particularly productive day, I found Robert waiting by my car. He looked older than I remembered, more tired. For a moment, my maternal instincts kicked in and I wanted to ask if he was eating enough, sleeping well, taking care of himself. Then I remembered Christmas Eve, and the feeling passed. "Hello, Robert. Mom." He stuffed his hands in his coat pockets, a gesture I remembered from his teenage years when he was preparing to ask for something. "We need to talk." "About what?" "About what you're doing with your money. About this foundation. About Emma Chen and whether she's giving you good advice." Emma Chen is the most ethical, competent financial advisor I've ever worked with. She's also become a dear friend. "That's the problem, Mom? She's supposed to be your advisor, not your friend. Friends can influence you in ways that aren't in your best financial interest." I looked at my son, this middle-aged man who was lecturing me about friendship as if I were a child, and felt something shift inside me. Not anger, exactly. More like a final letting go of the last hope I'd been carrying that he might someday see me as a person worthy of respect. "Robert, when was the last time you asked me about anything other than my money? That's not... we talk about lots of things. Do we? Name one conversation we've had in the past year that wasn't about your business problems, your financial needs, or your concerns about my spending." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. "I can't either," I said gently. "And that tells us everything we need to know about our relationship, doesn't it? Mom, I don't understand why you're being like this. We're family. We're supposed to look out for each other." "You're absolutely right. We are supposed to look out for each other. But looking out for someone means caring about their happiness, their health, their emotional well-being. It doesn't mean monitoring their bank account and intervening when they spend money on something you don't approve of." Robert's face flushed. $29 million. Mom, you've given away $29 million to strangers instead of your own family. $29 million that I earned, Robert. That I built from nothing after your father died. It was never yours to begin with. "But we're your children? Doesn't that mean anything to you?" "It means everything to me. That's why it breaks my heart that you only seem to remember you're my son when you want something from me." I unlocked my car and got in, leaving Robert standing in the parking lot with his mouth open. As I drove away, I saw him in my rearview mirror, pulling out his phone to call Linda, no doubt. Tomorrow, I knew the real fight would begin. But tonight, I was going home to Willowbrook Gardens, where Dorothy was saving me a seat at the weekly book club discussion, and where people were genuinely happy to see me walk through the door. Some battles are worth fighting. And some victories are worth whatever they cost. The phone started ringing at 6 in the morning. I was in my kitchen at Willowbrook Gardens, making coffee and watching the sunrise paint the community garden in shades of gold, when my landline began its insistent chiming. Then my cell phone, then my landline again. I knew what this meant. Emma had called me the night before to let me know the final asset transfers had been completed. The Harold Thompson Foundation now held nearly all of my fortune, $29 million dedicated to helping elderly people find dignity, community, and protection from family neglect. My children had probably received their quarterly investment reports that morning, reports that would show their anticipated inheritance had shrunk from $29 million to $200,000 each. I let the phones ring. Instead, I took my coffee to the balcony and watched Mrs. Chen, Emma's grandmother-in-law who had moved to Willowbrook Gardens the month before, tend to her small plot in the community garden. At 89, she moved slowly but with purpose, pruning her winter herbs with the careful attention of someone who understood that nurturing growth takes patience and consistency. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had learned more about patience and nurturing from watching Mrs. Chen tend her plants than I had from 47 years of trying to cultivate love from my own children. By the time I finished my coffee, I had 17 missed calls. At 9 o'clock sharp, Emma called. "Maggie, are you all right? Robert's been calling my office every 10 minutes since 7:30. He's not taking the news well, I imagine not. What exactly did he say? I can't repeat most of it in polite company. But the gist is that he wants an immediate meeting with both of us to discuss this situation before it goes any further." "And you told him?" "I told him that all transactions were completed legally and according to your explicit instructions. I also told him that if he wanted to meet with you, he needed to go through you directly, not through me." "Good. Emma, I want you to know that no matter what happens in the coming days, I don't regret any of this, even if they try to challenge your competency. Even if they make things ugly." I looked out at Mrs. Chen, who was now chatting with Dorothy over the fence between their garden plots. Both women were laughing at something, their faces bright with genuine pleasure in each other's company. Especially then. "Emma, for the first time in years, I'm surrounded by people who see me as a complete person, not just a source of money or problems to be solved. Whatever my children try to do to me now, they can't take that away." At noon, Robert and Linda arrived at Willowbrook Gardens together. I was expecting them, of course. Margaret, my assistant, had called to warn me that they'd been trying to reach me through the foundation office, demanding my address and making vague threats about family intervention. I met them in the community room rather than my apartment, partly for privacy, but mostly because I wanted witnesses. Dorothy was there playing cards with 3 other residents, and I knew she wouldn't hesitate to speak up if things got out of hand. My children looked terrible. Robert's face was flushed with anger, his usually perfect hair disheveled. Linda appeared to have been crying, her makeup smeared and her hands shaking slightly. "Mom," Linda said, her voice breaking, "how could you do this to us?" "Do what exactly?"
"You've given away our inheritance!"
Robert exploded, causing several card players to look up with interest. $29 million that was supposed to provide for our children's futures, for our retirement security. "You've given it all away to strangers." "I've used my money to help people who need it, just as I've been using my money to help both of you for the past 20 years. "That's different," Linda said. "We're your family, or you. When was the last time either of you treated me like family?" "We visit," Robert protested. "You stop by when you need something. There's a difference." Dorothy had abandoned all pretense of playing cards and was now watching our conversation with undisguised fascination. I caught her eye and she gave me a small nod of encouragement. "Mom, please." Linda tried a different approach, her voice soft and pleading. "I know we haven't been the most attentive children. I know we've taken you for granted sometimes, but we can change. We can do better, can you? Linda, 2 months ago I moved to a new home, started a new job, completely changed my life. How long did it take you to notice?" "Ooh." She started, then stopped. 6 weeks. "It took you 6 weeks to notice I wasn't sitting in that little apartment waiting for you to need something from me." Robert pulled out a chair and sat down heavily. For the first time since they'd arrived, he looked more defeated than angry. "Mom, I don't understand. We thought you were happy with the way things were. You never complained. You never said you wanted things to be different. I tried for years to tell you what I needed. But every time I asked for more time together, more inclusion in your lives, you acted like I was being needy and demanding. So I stopped asking. But the money," Linda pressed. "Mom, Robert's business is in trouble. The kids' college funds aren't where they need to be. You were counting on me dying." The words hung in the air like a slap. Linda gasped and Robert's face went white. "That's not? We never wanted you to die," Linda whispered. "Maybe not actively. But my death was part of your financial planning, wasn't it? You've been waiting for me to die so you could inherit money you never earned from a woman you couldn't be bothered to visit. That's horrible," Robert said. "We would never." "Robert, you called me the Maggie situation. I heard you on Christmas Eve, laughing about avoiding me so you wouldn't have to manage me during the holidays." The color drained completely from his face. You were there. I was there. I came to surprise you with the greatest gift I could think of. Immediate access to my entire fortune. I was going to give you everything that night, Robert. Every penny. And instead, I heard you and Linda discussing me like I was some kind of pest you needed to avoid." Linda began crying in earnest now. Mom, we didn't mean. We were just stressed about the holidays, about having everything perfect for the kids. And I was the thing that would have made it imperfect. No, that's not. Okay, yes. Maybe we said things we shouldn't have. But we were tired. And we just wanted one evening without having to worry about anyone else's needs. Without having to acknowledge that I had needs at all. Dorothy had completely given up on her card game now and was leaning forward in her chair. Not even pretending not to listen. Mrs. Thompson, she called out in her clear, carrying voice. Are these the children you told us about? The ones who never visit? Robert and Linda turned to stare at her, clearly mortified that our family business was being aired in front of strangers. Dorothy, please, I said gently. No. I think she should answer. Dorothy continued, standing up and walking over to our table. Because I've been watching you blossom here for 2 months, Margaret. I've seen you laugh and make friends and contribute to this community in ways that matter. And now these people show up, making you cry, demanding explanations for how you spend your own money. She turned to Robert and Linda with the stern expression of a retired teacher who had dealt with difficult parents for 40 years. Let me tell you something about your mother. She volunteers at the food bank every Wednesday. She reads to children at the library every Saturday. She's funding a community center that will help hundreds of elderly people avoid the loneliness she used to feel. She's doing more good in the world at 72 than most people do in their entire lives. We appreciate that, Linda said weakly. But she's still our mother, and we have a right to be concerned about her decisions. Do you? When did you earn that right? By visiting regularly. By calling to check on her well-being. By including her in your family gatherings. Robert stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous. We don't need to justify our relationship with our mother to a stranger. You're right, Dorothy said. You need to justify it to her. The room fell silent except for the soft sound of Linda's continued crying. Finally, I spoke. I want you both to understand something. This isn't about punishing you. This isn't revenge. This is about me finally choosing to live my own life instead of waiting for you to include me in yours. But the money, Robert started, will go to people who need it more than you do. You're both educated, capable adults with careers and homes and healthy children. The elderly people our foundation helps have nothing. No money, no family support, no hope. They deserve my help more than you deserve my wealth. What about the grandchildren? Linda asked desperately. Emma and Michael and the twins. Don't you want to provide for their futures? I've set aside $50,000 for each of them, to be held in trust until they're 25. That's more than most grandparents can leave their grandchildren. 50,000.
Mom, that won't even cover 1 year of college?
Then you'll have to find other ways to pay for their education. The way most parents do. Robert slammed his hand on the table, startling everyone in the room. This is insane. You're punishing us for one overheard conversation, for one moment of frustration. People say things they don't mean when they're stressed. One conversation? Robert, that conversation was just the moment I finally heard what I'd been refusing to see for years. How long has it been since either of you called me just to talk? How long since you invited me to dinner without needing a babysitter? How long since you asked about my hopes, my dreams, my feelings about anything? Neither of them answered. I've been thinking about this for months, I continued. That Christmas Eve was just the catalyst. You've both been treating me like a burden for years, and I've been enabling it by accepting whatever scraps of attention you threw my way. So you're just cutting us off? Linda asked, her voice hollow. Your own children? No. I'm stopping the financial support that allowed you to treat me badly without consequences. If you want a relationship with me now, it will have to be because you actually want one, not because you need something from me. And if we can't accept that? Robert asked. I looked at my son, this man I had raised and loved and sacrificed for, and felt a deep sadness for what we had lost, but also a profound sense of peace about what I had gained. Then you'll have the inheritance you've already received from me. 20 years of financial support, paid college educations, help with house down payments, business loans, babysitting, and emergency funds whenever you needed them. It adds up to more than most children ever get from their parents. I stood up from the table. I love you both. I always will. But I won't spend the rest of my life begging for your love in return. The Harold Thompson Foundation office is downtown on 3rd Street, if you ever want to see what I'm doing with my time now. And you're always welcome to visit me here if you come as my children who want to spend time with their mother, not as my heirs who want to manage my assets. Mom, please? Linda reached for my hand. Don't do this. We can work things out, we can be a family again. I agreed. But it will have to be a different kind of family than what we've had. One based on mutual respect instead of financial obligation. I walked away from the table, leaving my children sitting in the community room of my new home, surrounded by the friends who had welcomed me with open arms and asked nothing from me except the pleasure of my company. Behind me, I could hear Linda crying and Robert making angry phone calls, probably to lawyers. But ahead of me, Mrs. Chen was waiting by her garden plot, holding a small pot of herbs she'd grown herself. For your kitchen, she said with a smile. Basil grows better when it's tended by someone who appreciates it. I took the gift with hands that were finally steady, finally free. The reckoning was complete. Now the real work of building a life worth living could begin. Spring arrived early that year, and with it came both legal papers and unexpected blessings. The legal papers arrived first. Robert and Linda had hired an attorney, an expensive one, judging by the letterhead, to challenge my mental competency and the validity of the foundation transfers. The language was cold and clinical, filled with phrases like diminished capacity, undue influence, and fiduciary responsibility. Reading it felt like being described by strangers who had never met me but were convinced they knew better than I did what was good for me. Emma and I met with my attorney, Jonathan Silver, a kind man in his 60s who specialized in elder law and had seen his share of family financial disputes. Frankly, Mrs. Thompson, they don't have much of a case, he said after reviewing their filing. You've been managing your own affairs competently for decades. You had multiple witnesses to your decision-making process, including me, Emma, and the Foundation's board of directors, and most importantly, you can clearly articulate your reasons for the transfers. What will this mean, though? How long will it take? They're asking for a competency hearing and a temporary restraining order on any further Foundation activities. The hearing will probably be scheduled within 60 days. In the meantime, I'd recommend you document everything you do, keep calendars, save emails, maintain records of your daily activities. We want to show the court that you're not only competent but thriving. That wouldn't be difficult. My days were fuller and more purposeful than they had been in years. The Harold Thompson Foundation had officially opened its first community center in March. Located in a renovated church basement on the east side of town, it offered everything from hot meals and medical screenings to art classes and computer training. We had hired Maria Santos, a social worker with 20 years of experience in elder care, as our director, and she had transformed the space into something magical. You should see this place on a typical afternoon, Emma told me as we drove to the center for the monthly board meeting. Yesterday I stopped by and found Mrs. Patterson from the grocery store teaching 5 other women how to use email to stay in touch with distant grandchildren. Meanwhile, 3 gentlemen were having a heated but friendly chess tournament, and someone had organized an impromptu book discussion about that mystery novel everyone's been reading. It sounds wonderful. It is. And Maggie? You should know, we've received over 200 applications for assistance from our emergency fund in just 6 weeks. People are finding out about us through word of mouth, through social workers, through their doctors. The need is enormous. The emergency fund was something I was particularly proud of. We provided small grants, usually $500 to $2,000, to help elderly people with urgent needs. Home repairs to make houses safer, medical equipment not covered by insurance. Temporary financial assistance for those waiting for Social Security benefits to be approved. Every application came with a story that broke my heart and reinforced my conviction that the money was being used exactly as it should be. Like Eleanor Michaels, 83, whose adult son had stolen her Social Security checks and left her without money for groceries or medication. Our fund helped her get back on her feet and connected her with legal aid to prosecute the theft. Like James Wright, 76, a Korean War veteran whose family had dumped him at a sub-standard nursing home and never visited. We helped him move to a better facility and started a letter-writing program so he wouldn't feel forgotten. Like Sarah Chen, no relation to Emma or Mrs. Chen, but the connection amused me, whose daughter-in-law had convinced her son that his mother was too expensive to care for at home. Sarah had been living in her car for 3 weeks when she found our hotline number. We got her into temporary housing and helped mediate a family meeting that resulted in a much better care arrangement. Every story reminded me of my own near miss. I could so easily have become one of these people, discarded, dismissed, forgotten by the very people who were supposed to love me most. The difference was that I had resources to change my situation. These people had nothing except what we could provide. On a Thursday in April, I was at the community center helping with the afternoon activities when Margaret Riley burst through the doors with a huge grin on her face.
Mrs. Thompson!
You have to see this. She was waving a newspaper, the Metropolitan Daily, our city's largest publication. The headline on the front page read, "Local Foundation Changes Lives, One Elder at a Time." The article was a feature story about our work, complete with photos of the community center and interviews with several people we had helped. But what made my heart swell was the sidebar that profiled me as the founder. Margaret Thompson never intended to become a social crusader, it read. The 72-year-old widow and retired businesswoman started the Harold Thompson Foundation after experiencing her own brush with family neglect. I realized that having money doesn't protect you from being invisible to the people who are supposed to love you, Thompson explains. But it can help you build connections with people who see your value as a human being. The article went on to describe our programs and our impact, but also included personal details that painted a picture of my new life at Willowbrook Gardens. Dorothy had apparently given the reporter quite an earful about my transformation from lonely apartment dweller to community leader. "She's like a different person," Dorothy was quoted as saying. "When she first moved here, she was so quiet, so careful not to take up too much space. Now she lights up every room she enters. She's found her purpose." That evening, my phone rang. For a moment, I tensed, expecting another angry call from Robert or Linda. Instead, it was a voice I hadn't heard in 15 years. "Maggie, this is Patricia Hawkins." "Patricia Morrison. From Harold's old company?" "Patricia, how wonderful to hear from you. How did you find me?" "I saw the article in the paper." "Maggie, I had to call. What you're doing is exactly what Harold would have wanted." Patricia had worked with Harold in the early days of his engineering firm. Before he sold it and started the business that eventually became my company, she had been one of the few people who really knew us as a couple, who understood the partnership Harold and I had built together. "I've been thinking about this since I read the article," she continued. "Harold used to worry about what would happen to you if he died first. Not financially, he knew you were smart and capable. But socially, he worried that the children would be too busy with their own lives to really take care of you." He was right to worry. "But Maggie, he also used to say that you were the strongest person he knew. That if life knocked you down, you'd find a way to get back up and help other people in the process." I felt tears prick my eyes. "He said that? All the time. He was so proud of how you handled things after his death. Building the business, raising the children, making a life for yourself. He would be incredibly proud of what you're doing now." After we hung up, I sat in my apartment at Willowbrook Gardens thinking about Harold and the life we had planned together. We had always talked about doing something meaningful with our money eventually. Traveling, yes, but also giving back to the community that had supported us. The children had never been part of that conversation. Harold had loved them deeply, but he had also seen their limitations. He would have wanted them to be comfortable. But he would have wanted our money to make a real difference in the world. I was doing exactly what he would have done if he had lived to see our children become the adults they had become. 2 weeks later, Emma called with news that surprised even me. "Maggie, we just received a call from the Community Foundation of Greater Metro. They want to partner with us on a statewide elder care initiative." "What kind of partnership?" "They're talking about replicating our model in 5 other cities. They want to provide startup funding and administrative support to establish Harold Thompson Foundation satellite locations." I was quiet for a moment, absorbing the magnitude of what she was saying. "Emma, when I started this foundation, I thought I was just trying to help a few people in our city. Now you're telling me we could help thousands." "Potentially, yes. The Community Foundation has been looking for exactly this kind of grassroots, community-based approach to elder care. Our success rate is remarkable, Maggie. 93% of the people we've helped through our emergency fund are still living independently 6 months later. That's almost unheard of." That weekend, I drove to the original community center for our monthly volunteer appreciation dinner. As I walked through the doors, I was struck by the transformation of the space since we had opened. What had been a bare, institutional basement was now warm and welcoming, filled with comfortable furniture donated by community members and decorated with artwork created by our participants. The walls were covered with photos from our activities, cooking classes, game tournaments, birthday celebrations, small weddings for elderly couples who had found love in their later years. But more than the physical transformation, it was the energy in the room that took my breath away. 50 people were gathered around tables, talking and laughing with the easy familiarity of old friends. These were people who, just months ago, had been isolated and forgotten. Now they had community, purpose, and hope. Maria Santos approached me with a woman I didn't recognize, tiny and elegant, probably in her late 70s, with silver hair pulled back in a perfect chignon. "Mrs. Thompson, I'd like you to meet Ruth Davidson." Ruth heard about our program through her doctor and started coming to our activities last month. Ruth took my hands in both of hers and looked me directly in the eyes. "Mrs. Thompson, I want to thank you, not just for the programs, though they've been wonderful, but for proving that it's possible to start over at our age." "Start over how?" 6 months ago. My daughter decided I was too much trouble to have around anymore. She moved me into a nursing home and told everyone I had dementia, even though there's nothing wrong with my mind. I felt like my life was over, like I was just waiting to die. She squeezed my hands tighter. "Then I found your story in the newspaper. I read about how you refused to accept being invisible, how you took control of your own life and made something beautiful with it. It gave me the courage to fight back." "What did you do?" "I hired a lawyer. Not easy on a Social Security budget, but I found one who works with seniors. I proved my competency, got myself out of that awful place, and found a nice apartment near here. Now I volunteer at the Literacy Center 3 days a week, and I'm taking painting classes for the first time in 50 years. She smiled, and her whole face lit up. "I'm 78 years old, Mrs. Ree. Thompson, and I'm finally living the life I want to live. If you can transform yourself at 72, I figured I could do it at 78. As Ruth walked away to join a table of friends, I felt a profound sense of completion. The Harold Thompson Foundation wasn't just helping people with money or services. It was giving them something far more valuable, the example of someone who had refused to accept being diminished by age or family neglect. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma, court hearing scheduled for May 15th. "Are you ready for this?" I looked around the room full of people who had rebuilt their lives with dignity and courage, and I typed back, "More ready than I've ever been for anything." The legal battle with my children would be unpleasant, but it was just a distraction from the real work. I had found my purpose, my community, and my joy. Whatever happened in court couldn't take those away from me. Harold would have been proud. More importantly, I was proud of myself. And after 72 years of putting everyone else's needs first, that felt like the greatest victory of all. The courthouse was smaller than I had expected, and less intimidating. May 15th had dawned bright and clear, the kind of spring morning that made everything seem possible. I arrived with Jonathan Silver, my attorney, and Emma, who had taken the day off work to support me. As we walked up the steps, I was surprised to see Dorothy Patterson and Mrs. Chen waiting by the entrance, along with Margaret Riley and Maria Santos from the foundation. "What are you all doing here?" I asked. "Supporting you," Dorothy said simply. "Jonathan called and asked if any of us would be willing to testify about your competency if needed." We all volunteered. I felt my throat tighten with emotion. These people, my chosen family, had rearranged their schedules to stand beside me in what could be one of the most difficult days of my life. Inside the courtroom, Robert and Linda sat with their attorney, a sharp-faced woman in an expensive suit who looked like she could argue that black was white if the price was right. They wouldn't meet my eyes as I entered. Judge Patricia Morrison, no relation to Patricia Hawkins, but the coincidence made me smile, was a woman in her 60s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She had clearly read all the filings carefully. "Mrs. Thompson," she began, "your children have petitioned this court to declare you mentally incompetent to manage your financial affairs. They claim you've been unduly influenced to donate $29 million to a charity, and they're asking the court to reverse these transactions and appoint a conservator for your estate." "I understand, Your Honor. Before we begin, I want to note that I've received character references from 17 different individuals attesting to your mental acuity, emotional stability, and sound judgment. I've also reviewed the extensive documentation your attorney has provided regarding your daily activities, medical records, and decision-making processes. This is unusually thorough preparation for a competency hearing. Robert and Linda's attorney looked uncomfortable. However, the judge continued, the petitioners are your children, and family concerns about an elderly parent's well-being deserve serious consideration. We'll proceed with testimony. Robert was called to testify first. He looked miserable as he took the stand, avoiding eye contact with everyone in the room. Mr. Thompson, please explain your concerns about your mother's recent financial decisions. Your Honor, my mother has always been generous. But giving away $29 million to strangers while leaving her own family with almost nothing isn't the mother I know. Someone must have convinced her to do this. Who do you believe influenced her? Her financial advisor, Emma Chen. My mother has become unusually close to her, and Miss Chen has been involved in all of these transfers. Emma's attorney stood up. Objection, Your Honor. Mr. Thompson is speculating about Miss Chen's motives without evidence. Sustained. Mr. Thompson, do you have any direct evidence that Miss Chen coerced or manipulated your mother? Robert's face flushed. Not direct evidence, no. But the timing is suspicious. My mother starts this foundation right after moving out of her apartment without discussing it with family. When was the last time you visited your mother's apartment? Robert was quiet for a long moment. I'm not sure. Approximately, Mr. Thompson, maybe 6 months ago, but we talked on the phone regularly. How often? Another pause. Every few weeks. When she called? When was the last time you called her? Robert's attorney objected, but the judge allowed the question. I don't remember specifically. Judge Morrison made a note. Mr. Thompson, are you aware that your mother volunteers at a food bank, reads to children at the library, and serves on the board of a successful charitable foundation? No. She never mentioned those things. Are you aware that she lives in an active adult community where she participates in book clubs, gardening groups, and social activities? She told me she moved to a senior community. I thought it was because she needed more care. Have you visited her there? Robert's voice was barely audible. No. Linda's testimony was similar, lots of speculation about undue influence, but very little actual knowledge about my life or activities. When asked about her relationship with me, she broke down crying. I love my mother, she sobbed. I know we haven't been as attentive as we should have been, but we never wanted her to feel like we didn't care. We just got caught up in our own lives. Miss Thompson, when did you last spend time with your mother for the purpose of enjoying her company, rather than needing something from her? Linda couldn't answer. Emma testified next, clearly and professionally explaining her role in my financial decisions. Mrs. Thompson approached me about establishing the foundation in late December. She was very clear about her motivations. She wanted to help other elderly people avoid the isolation and neglect she had experienced. Every decision was hers. I provided professional advice and administrative support, but the vision and the commitment were entirely her own. Did you encourage her to exclude her children from her estate? Absolutely not. In fact, I initially suggested she discuss her plans with her family first. Mrs. Thompson chose not to, because she wanted to make these decisions independently, without family pressure. In your professional opinion, is Mrs. Thompson competent to manage her financial affairs? Completely competent. She understands complex financial concepts, asks thoughtful questions, and makes decisions based on clear reasoning and personal values. She's one of the most financially savvy clients I've ever worked with. Then it was my turn. I walked to the witness stand feeling calmer than I had expected. In the gallery, I could see my supporters, Emma, Dorothy, Mrs. Chen, Margaret, Maria, and several residents from Willowbrook Gardens who had insisted on coming to show their support. Mrs. Thompson, Judge Morrison began gently. Please tell the court about your decision to establish the Harold Thompson Foundation. I took a breath and began to speak, not just to the judge, but to my children, who were finally going to hear the truth about what their behavior had cost. Your Honor, on Christmas Eve of last year, I went to my son's house to surprise my family. I had prepared documents to give them my entire fortune, $29 million, as an early inheritance. I wanted to see their faces light up with joy while I was still alive to share in their happiness. I glanced at Robert and Linda, both of whom had gone very pale. Instead, I overheard them through the window, discussing how relieved they were that I hadn't shown up to insert myself into their Christmas. My son called me the Maggie situation that needed to be managed. They were laughing about pretending not to be home so they wouldn't have to deal with me. Linda made a small sound of distress, but I continued. Standing in the snow outside that warm, happy house where I wasn't welcome, I realized that my children saw me as nothing more than a burden and a bank account. That realization broke my heart, but it also freed me. Freed you how? For 47 years, I had shaped my life around trying to earn my children's love and attention. I made myself small and undemanding, always available when they needed something, never asking for more than they were willing to give. But it wasn't working. The more I gave, the less they valued me. So you decided to redirect your charitable giving? I decided to stop waiting for other people to see my worth and start building a life that reflected my own values. The foundation isn't about punishing my children, it's about helping people who need what I needed to be seen, valued, and treated with dignity. Judge Morrison nodded. Tell me about your current living situation and activities. For the next 20 minutes, I described my life at Willowbrook Gardens, my work with the foundation, the friends I had made, the purpose I had found. I talked about the elderly people we had helped, the community center that was transforming lives, the statewide expansion that would help thousands more people avoid the loneliness I had experienced. Mrs. Thompson, do you understand the financial implications of your charitable giving? Completely. I've reduced my children's inheritance from approximately $14.5 million each to $100,000 each, plus $50,000 for each grandchild. I've kept enough for my own comfortable living and care if I need it. The rest is being used to help people who have nothing. Do you believe your children will be financially secure with the inheritance you've designated? Your Honor, both my children have college educations that I paid for. Robert owns a business and a home worth over $600,000. Linda is married to a successful professional and lives in a home worth nearly as much. They have healthy children and good careers. They don't need my money to survive. They want it to be comfortable. And the people your foundation helps have nothing. No family support, inadequate income, no resources to change their situations. My money can transform their lives. For my children, it would just be extra comfort. Judge Morrison made notes, then looked up at me. Mrs. Thompson, if the court were to order you to restore your children's inheritance, how would you respond? I thought carefully before answering. Your Honor, I would comply with the court's order because I respect the law. But I would also be deeply disappointed that my fundamental right to determine how my own money is used had been taken away from me. I earned that money through 40 years of hard work. I should have the right to use it according to my own values and judgment, even if it means your children and grandchildren won't inherit wealth. Your Honor, the greatest gift I can give my grandchildren is the example that self-respect and purpose matter more than money. And the greatest gift I can give my children is the opportunity to build a relationship with me based on love rather than financial expectation. After all the testimony was complete, Judge Morrison called a recess to review the evidence. We waited in the hallway for nearly 2 hours. Finally, we were called back into the courtroom. After careful consideration of all testimony and evidence, Judge Morrison began, this court finds no basis for declaring Mrs. Margaret Thompson mentally incompetent. Mrs. Thompson demonstrated clear understanding of her financial decisions, articulated reasonable motivations for those decisions, and showed no evidence of cognitive impairment or undue influence. Robert and Linda's attorney stood up. Your Honor, we request that the court consider the emotional distress these decisions have caused the family. Counselor, emotional distress is not grounds for overturning competent financial decisions. Mrs. Thompson has the absolute right to dispose of her assets as she sees fit, regardless of her family's preferences. The judge turned to me. Mrs. Thompson, the court commends you for your charitable work and your commitment to helping vulnerable members of our community. Your foundation appears to be making a significant positive impact. She then looked at Robert and Linda. Mr. and Miss Thompson, I understand your disappointment about your reduced inheritance. However, this court cannot and will not force a parent to provide for adult children who are capable of providing for themselves. Perhaps this experience will encourage you to rebuild your relationship with your mother based on mutual respect and genuine affection. Case dismissed. As we left the courthouse, Robert and Linda caught up with me on the steps. Mom, Robert said, his voice shaky, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the things I said. Sorry for how we treated you. Sorry for bringing you to court. I'm sorry too, Linda added, tears streaming down her face. We were selfish and thoughtless, and we took you for granted. I don't know if you can forgive us, but we want to try to do better. I looked at my children. these middle-aged adults who were my babies, no matter how they had hurt me, and felt something shift in my chest. I forgave you months ago, I said. The question now is whether you can forgive yourselves and build the relationship we should have had all along. How do we do that? Linda asked. Start by getting to know me. Not as your mother who owes you something, but as Margaret Thompson, a person with her own thoughts and feelings and dreams. Visit me at Willowbrook Gardens, meet my friends, learn about the foundation, understand what makes me happy now, and if we do that, Robert asked, then maybe we can build something real together. Maybe we can finally be a family. 6 months later, as I write this story, things have changed in ways I never could have imagined. Robert visits me every other week. He brings his children. And we're getting to know each other again. He's even volunteered to help with the foundation's financial planning. Linda calls me twice a week just to talk. She's started volunteering at the community center, helping with our computer classes for seniors. Her daughter Emma, my granddaughter, wrote her college application essay about the importance of family respect and how her grandmother taught her to value people over money. The Harold Thompson Foundation now operates in 8 cities across 3 states. We've helped over 3,000 elderly people maintain their independence and dignity. The community centers are thriving, the emergency fund has provided over $1 million in assistance, and we've trained hundreds of families to better communicate with their aging parents. But the greatest success isn't measured in dollars or programs. It's measured in Christmas morning when my children called, not to ask for anything, but to wish me well and share their holiday plans. It's measured in Easter dinner at Robert's house, where I was invited not out of obligation, but because they genuinely wanted me there. It's measured in Linda's teenage daughter asking if she can interview me for a school project about inspiring women. It's measured in my daily life at Willowbrook Gardens, surrounded by friends who chose me and whom I chose in return. Some people might say I gave up $29 million to teach my children a lesson. I prefer to think of it differently. I invested $29 million in my own happiness and self-respect. I used it to build a life worth living and a legacy worth leaving. And in the process, I gave my children something more valuable than money. I gave them the chance to love me for who I am, not what I can provide. Harold always said that the best investments are the ones that pay dividends for generations. He was right about that, as he was about so many things. The Harold Thompson Foundation will continue helping elderly people long after I'm gone. My grandchildren will grow up understanding that family means respect and care, not just obligation. And somewhere, other grandmothers who feel invisible and forgotten will read this story and realize that it's never too late to demand the love and dignity they deserve. That Christmas Eve when I heard my children dismiss me as the Maggie situation, I thought my world was ending. Instead, it was just beginning. To all the silent grandmas out there, your story doesn't have to end with being invisible. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away from people who don't value you and build a life with people who do. You're worth more than you know, and it's never too late to prove it.